Year 10 and 11, welcome to your analysis of chapters 8, 9 and 10 of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde in preparation for your AQA English Literature exam. As this is the third video, please make sure you have watched the first two from my YouTube channel, which is an analysis of chapters 1 to 3, including the context, and an analysis of chapters 4 to 7 with an example of the pathetic fallacy. Chapter 8. What happens is as follows. Poole visits Utterson. He says he fears something is wrong with Jekyll, and they go to the laboratory. A voice inside refuses to let Utterson in. Poole says he thinks Jekyll has been murdered. He heard him cry out, and he also says the murderer is still in the cabinet. Poole says he has seen the man and he is short and wears a mask, and Poole thinks it is Hyde. Utterson and Poole arm themselves, and Bradshaw the footman covers the back door so Hyde cannot escape. Utterson announces that they are going to break into the room, and Hyde calls out, begging them not to, but they break down the door. They find the body of Hyde in clothes that are too big for him, twitching on the floor, and Jekyll is nowhere to be found. They find an envelope addressed to Utterson, and it contains a new will in Utterson's favour. A note telling Utterson to read the letter he has from Lanyon and a long letter from Jekyll. They lock up the cabinet with Hyde's body inside, and Utterson goes home to read the documents. What is the importance of the chapter? Well, it is Hyde's death, and that is the climax of the novella. Stevenson uses this chapter to show us just how far away from the truth Utterson remains. Utterson is still unwilling to allow for any breach of propriety and order. As he talks with Poole before the locked door of the laboratory, Utterson is growing desperate to avoid taking action. He offers more and more absurd explanations for what Poole has seen. Remember, Utterson who doesn't want to accept what could have happened. He suggests that Jekyll has a disease which has changed his appearance. Utterson is willing to accept any explanation. His unwillingness to break into Jekyll's laboratory reflects his continued concern for his friend's reputation. Gothic novels often centre around secrets, such as Jekyll's connection to Hyde, or around doppelgangers. A doppelganger is a German term referring to people who resemble other characters in strange, disconcerting ways. Frankenstein's monster is a doppelganger for Frankenstein, just as Hyde is for Jekyll. So we might want to use the word doppelganger in an exam response. But above all, Gothic novels depend upon geography for their power. Nearly every Gothic novel takes place in a strange location. In Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, that place is the fog-blanketed world of nighttime London. So remember, if we have a question about setting, that we must reference Gothic literature. Because remember, it is the setting that adds to the sense of unease and adds to the atmosphere that Stephen successfully creates. If we just look at some key quotations then. So as Utterson and Poole walk to Jekyll's house, we get the following description. It is a wild, cold, seasonable night of March, with a pale moon lying on her back, as though the wind had tilted her, and a flying rack of the most, I'm never going to pronounce it, am I? Diaphanous, and lawny texture. Now, we've got a very poetic description here, don't we? And we have the personification of the moon lying on her back. And this creates a feeling of something natural. It creates a feeling of unearthliness, because we've got the moon apparently blown over by the wind and the night being wild, and therefore the clouds, we've got this image of the clouds flying rack as if they move quite quickly, and that the clouds are carried by the wind, and it adds to the sense of something that is stronger than humans, and that is obviously nature. And once again, this description of nature and the weather is the pathetic fallacy. And as I've said in my other videos, Stevenson does use that to add to atmosphere. Pathetic fallacy is huge in this novel. And it creates a sense of foreboding that we know something awful is about to happen or has already happened, and therefore we feel unease. Our next quotation is, Poole and Utterson stand ready to break down the door. The scud had banked over the moon, and it was now quite dark. The wind, which only broke in puffs and drafts into the deep well of building, tossed the light of the candle to and fro about their steps. If we look closely at the description of the wind again, the fact that it tosses the light of the candle to and fro, it's a very Gothic atmosphere being created. You've got to ask yourself, what are these natural conditions doing? Why is it that we have this description? And Gothic novels, which became popular in the 18th century, explored ideas about death and passionate feelings, and these were linked more often than not to the supernatural. So settings and the description were often eerie and terrifying. If you think about classic Gothic novels like Frankenstein and Dracula, then Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde fits in here. You've got to ask yourself what mood is created. Look, again, we've got darkness. The wind breaks in. It tosses the light of the candle around. And if we move to Poole, Poole says, when that masked thing like a monkey jumped from among the chemicals and whipped into the cabinet, it went down my spine like ice. And clearly there we've got two similes. We've got the comparison of Hyde to a monkey, and then we've got the effect it has on Poole and how it makes him feel extremely cold. In my second video, which is an analysis of chapters 4 to 7, I have got an example paragraph about Hyde being compared to something ape-like. So please consult that. But here again, the simile about him being like a monkey, we can remember that as a short quotation, and it sets up this image of Hyde being like a primate who acts upon survival. And he's very animalistic, and we know he is anyway via the description we've had so far. So don't forget that Hyde is compared to an ape and a monkey by other characters. In this chapter we see the most extended interaction of Utterson with another character, that being Poole. Utterson's character is reinforced and developed here. He becomes irritated, one word quote, when Poole suggests something awful has happened and he suspects foul play. Utterson gets a little bit frightened there. Remember, because for us, Utterson is a practical man. When he turns up at the Jekyll house and sees that all the servants are together, he thinks that it is very irregular because they're not behaving as he expects. Remember, I've said quite a few times that he is a man of propriety, isn't he? In keeping with the profession of his character as a lawyer, he strives and looks for rational explanations of what's happened, and he dismisses anything that Poole suggests, especially when Poole suggests that the murderer is in the cabinet. Quote, that won't hold water. It doesn't commend itself to reason. His interpretation of Jekyll frantically trying to get hold of chemicals and waving a mask and acting desperately is that he has a disease. So Utterson believes that something must have happened to Jekyll. He must have some sort of altering disease, and therefore he is acting this way. Once again, he's making huge assumptions, as he has throughout the novella. Don't forget as well, he often places his assumptions as if they're facts. And remember that he's a man of action, so he responds under pressure in these unusual circumstances, and he isn't flustered and he isn't affected when they find Hyde's body. All right, and just a quick addition here. When they do enter the cabinet, there is a mirror, and the mirror pivots, and the frame is looking upward towards the ceiling. So we know that whoever's been in there does not want to see their own reflection. Okay. Chapter 9, Dr. Lanyon's narrative. What happens is basically this. The whole chapter is a letter from Lanyon, including within it a letter from Jekyll to Lanyon. So we've got to consider that when we're looking at structure. Jekyll's letter asks Lanyon to leave everything he is doing and go to Jekyll's house, where Poole will be waiting to break into the cabinet. Lanyon has to find a particular drawer and take it home and wait for a visitor at midnight. Jekyll makes it clear that his life and sanity rely on him doing this. Lanyon thinks that this is evidence that he's gone mad. When he gets the drawer, it contains chemicals and a book with dates and notes. Then at midnight, Hyde arrives. Lanyon is repulsed, particularly when Hyde touches his arm. Hyde mixes a potion with the chemicals. Hyde gives Lanyon an option. Watch him take the potion or walk outside with the potion in the glass, and Lanyon chooses to watch. Lanyon is then horrified by the effect it has on Hyde. He is even more shocked when Hyde transforms into Jekyll. The importance of the chapter is that we find out Jekyll and Hyde are the same person. A chemical potion is the means that switches between the two. We have the first extended first-person narrative in the book. It reveals more about Lanyon and about his disagreement with Jekyll over science. The chapter offers little explanation of what Lanyon has seen. We learn that Hyde and Jekyll are the same person and that the two personas can morph into one another. We remain largely in the dark, however, as to how or why this situation came about. Lanyon states that Jekyll told him everything after the transformation was complete, but he refrains from telling Utterson. Your quote there is, "What he told me in the next hour I cannot bring my mind to set on paper." There is a contrast between Jekyll and the mystical slash supernatural and Lanyon and his rational belief in science. The impact of the shock causes Lanyon to declare in chapter 6, quote, "I sometimes think if we knew all, we should be more glad to get away," which is a reference to death. And Lanyon has decided then that some knowledge is not worth the cost of obtaining or possessing it. Like Utterson and Enfield, he prefers silence to the exposure of dark truths. The task of exposing these truths must fall to Henry Jekyll himself in the final chapter of the novel. As the only character to have embraced the darker side of the world, Jekyll remains the only one willing to speak of it. Science is the most important theme in this chapter. If you want more details about science, please consult my first video, which is the analysis of chapter 1 to 3 and the context. The events here are narrated by Lanyon, who is a medical doctor and is interested in rational science. So therefore, he's the best person to tell this part of the story. He tries to give an account of what is odd about Hyde, and he says, quote, remarkable combination of great muscular activity and great apparent debility of constitution. So look again, great muscular, if we're remembering quick quotes. He tries to describe the physical effect that Hyde has on him, and he says incipient rigour, which means stiffening, and a marked sinking of the pulse. So the effect Hyde has on him is that he's so shocked. He's shocked to death, isn't he? So it's almost like this description isn't enough for the reader, though, because we still don't really know what Hyde looks like. So we get the physical symptoms that Lanyon suffers, but we don't actually get a description of what he sees. We also get a description of the potion and the transformation, which I shall do now. Writing about science then. So Stevenson does not name the chemicals Jekyll uses, and that adds to the theme of mystery. Remember, there's a lot of mystery used in this novella. But he does make it sound convincing by using scientific language. So we are told the potion is made from a, quote, blood red liquor and a crystalline salt of a white colour. Lanyon thinks the liquid contains phosphorus and some volatile ether. Ether there, if we don't know, it means air. So he thinks the liquid contains volatile air. So again, if we're writing about science, look at your one word quotation, volatile, and exactly what that means. And then therefore the effect it has on Jekyll is no surprise, because it actually makes him volatile as well, doesn't it? And violent. And look at blood red. Again, the description of the potion feeds exactly who Jekyll becomes when he's Hyde. So when combined, the liquids and the crystals fizz and fume and change colour. So it's all very dramatic. We get that the liquid crystals fizz and change colour, and we get the scientific words of effervesce, which means fizz, ebullition, which means bubbling, and metamorphosis, which means it changes. And it changes to a green colour, doesn't it? If we want to look at colours, then red has connotations of death and blood, and green has connotations of jealousy and envy. So again, if we're thinking about that in terms of connotation and interpretation, what might that tell us about Jekyll and Hyde? Hyde uses a glass to measure out what he needs. So again, it's very scientific. He takes it in one gulp. So again, is the suggestion there that there's more potion if he can drink it all in one go? Or is it just the desperate need for him to change the addiction that he has to this potion? The full quotation I've lined out there for you. Again, I don't expect you to remember it all, but just in case, it is: the mixture began as the crystals melted, to brighten in colour, to effervesce audibly, and to throw off small fumes of vapour. Suddenly, and at the same moment, the ebullition ceased, and the compound changed to a dark purple, which faded again, more slowly, to a watery green. Very difficult language used here, so try your best to use one-word quotations, I would advise here, in a question about science as well, because it's very difficult to remember huge chunks of text when the vocabulary isn't as familiar to us. I'm just going to move now to links to other texts. So if we're aiming for the A star, the A star star, then we do need to link this novella, and particularly Jekyll, to the text Dr. Faustus. Now, it's all associated with the danger of forbidden knowledge. Now, that originally comes from Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were exiled from paradise after eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge. I'm sure we all know that. And this is the theme in The Legend of Faust, which is told by Christopher Marlowe, or Dr. Faustus, whichever copy of the book you have. Now, in the book, Dr. Faustus, or Faust, which, as I say, whichever one you want, makes a deal with the devil. And he trades his soul for 20 years of unlimited knowledge and pleasure. And there's a clear link here between Jekyll and Faust, because Jekyll seeks knowledge beyond rational science and uses it to free part of himself to indulge in whatever pleasure he so chooses. But knowledge comes with a high price. Jekyll loses his reason and his life to this experiment. He asks Lanyon if greed of curiosity is too great to resist. And it is. And Lanyon dies because he is unable to accept what he has learned. And much like Jekyll and Hyde, Dr. Faustus is the same. Knowledge comes at too high a price. So basically he goes around for 20 years doing what he wants, magic tricks. He asks to see Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in the world. So he goes around doing what he wants. And then when the devil turns up with the bad angels, if you like, and they show him hell, he begs for redemption. He doesn't want to go to hell when he sees what it's like. But unfortunately, the devils rip him to pieces. They rip his body to pieces because obviously he sold his soul. So the link here is that knowledge comes at too high a price for Dr. Faustus and Jekyll. So if the question is applicable, think about the link that Dr. Jekyll has to Dr. Faustus. We are given more information about Hyde, and Lanyon is the same as other characters. He feels there's something wrong with Hyde, and we get the quote, "There was something abnormal and misbegotten in the very essence of the creature." And it's weird here because Lanyon, remember, is a medical doctor. He has probably seen many awful sights. So therefore, we might expect him not to be repulsed, but he is. And the word creature here, one word quote to remember, implies that beyond the physical, there is something inhuman or animalistic about Hyde. And it's frightening. It's not just his physical characteristics, it is his persona. And it frightens everybody. We've had all of these descriptions. Utterson's reaction, Enfield's reaction. And now we have Lanyon's reaction to him as well. So don't forget, one word quotation here, creature. So we have the big revelation as well, don't we? Lanyon's letter reveals the truth, that Jekyll and Hyde are the same person. And he saves the crucial information for the end of his account. And we get this quote. "Oh God," I screamed, "and oh God again and again, for there before my eyes, pale and shaken and half fainting, and groping before him with his hands like a man restored from death, there stood Henry Jekyll." So if we look closely at structure here, because we're going to need that, the structure of the sentence holds the key information until the last second. So there's a lot of suspense. And as a reader, we feel and see Lanyon's horror. If we look at before my eyes, almost as if he's unable to believe what he's seen, but he knows he's witnessed it. Again, it's difficult for us to understand what he's seen because all we get in terms of a description are pale, shaken, half fainting and groping. And we get the simile, like a man restored from death. So if we're thinking about imagery, we've had him described as a creature. We now get the fact that he looks like he's come back from the dead. So we know what implications that has in terms of being something repulsive. But as I say, mystery is huge in this novella, and the reader is unsure what the pale, shaken thing actually looks like. And therefore, this section recreates Lanyon's confusion and shock, because as a reader, we also feel that way. Again, I don't expect you to remember that full quotation because it's huge, but we might remember his reaction, "Oh God," and the description of pale, shaken, half fainting, groping, or the simile, "like a man restored from death." If we think about so far the similes used to describe Hyde and Jekyll, we've had an ape-like fury, like a monkey, and now we've got like a man restored from death. So all of these images present us with a frightening picture of what Hyde / Jekyll looks like when he's transformed. Your full quotation is here. "He put the glass to his lips and drank at one gulp. A cry followed. He reeled, staggered, clutched at the table and held on, staring with injected eyes, gasping with open mouth. And as I looked there came, I thought, a change. He seemed to swell. His face became suddenly black, and the features seemed to melt and alter. And at the next moment I had sprung to my feet and leaped back against the wall, my arm raised to shield me from that prodigy, my mind submerged in terror. 'Oh God,' I screamed, and 'oh God,' again and again, for there, before my eyes, pale and shaken and half fainting and groping before him with his hands, like a man restored from death, there stood Henry Jekyll." If we again just look here at language analysis, look at your verbs. The verbs Stevenson uses: reeled, staggered, clutched. The fact that he was staring, gasping. The change is peppered here with very active verbs, and we kind of realise the panic that Lanyon sees as the transformation happens. And then look, suddenly black. Well, black has connotations of something evil, sinister, and has associations with death. The features seem to melt. So there's your full transformation, that the features change. And look at Lanyon's reaction. "I sprung to my feet and leaped back." Look, I sprung and leaped. So verbs are huge here. So if we're doing something about the revelation or the transformation, look at your verbs and Lanyon's reaction. I'm going to analyse that in a little bit more detail now. So here's your analysis then. Lanyon describes the moment when Hyde, drinking the potion, whose ingredients Lanyon procured from Jekyll's laboratory, transforms him back to Jekyll. Lanyon, who earlier ridiculed Jekyll's experiments as unscientific balderdash, now sees the proof of Jekyll's success. And the sight so horrifies him that he dies shortly afterward. That's huge. The transformation constitutes the climactic moment in the story, when all the questions about Jekyll and Hyde come to a resolution. Stevenson heightens the effect of his climax by describing the scene in intensely vivid language, as I just said. So, when he depicts Hyde as staring with injected eyes and suggests the dreadful contortions of his features as they melt and alter, he evokes the ghastliness of the moment. The transformation process is violent, causing the body to reel, stagger and gasp. As I say, verbs are huge there. By this point, Jekyll is losing ground to Hyde and emerges half fainting as if restored from death. So we know that of the two, Hyde is more powerful, don't we? At the end of this video, so after I've analysed chapter 10, I've got an example paragraph that deals with Jekyll's struggle and how we might write about that. So that's at the end, after we have analysed chapter 10, which is now. So what happens in chapter 10? Henry Jekyll's full statement of the case is as follows. Jekyll gives an account of his history. he began thinking about how a person is made up of good and evil parts. Then he made a potion that could separate the two. As soon as he changed to Hyde, he became aware of the evil inside of him. The evil thrilled him, so he took the potion again and turned back to Jekyll. He started taking the potion regularly, but realised that Hyde knew no limits. One day, he woke as Hyde, but he hadn't taken the potion, so he decided to stop taking it. But the temptation became too strong, so he took it again, and then Hyde killed Carew. He dared not take the potion anymore, but he once again changed into Hyde unexpectedly, so he arranged for Lanyon to get the chemicals so he could change back. As he changed more easily into Hyde, he decided to stay as a recluse in the cabinet and laboratory. He ran out of the salt he needed for the potion and realised that he would be Hyde forever. He wrote his last statement after taking the final dose, uncertain whether Hyde would be caught and hanged or would kill himself before that happened. The importance of the chapter is as follows. It's the only time we hear Jekyll's account of events and we get an insight into his character. Jekyll's account clears up all of the mystery. Two of the most important themes are explored, which is the duality and the good/evil nature of humans. We realise that Hyde is driven by passion and is evil, but Jekyll remains a mixture of the two. Jekyll repeatedly claims that his goal was to liberate his light half from his darker impulses, but the opposite happens. His dark side grows stronger as the novel continues, until the old half-good, half-evil Jekyll ceases to exist. Hyde is smaller than Jekyll and younger, which leads Jekyll to surmise that his evil part is smaller and less developed than his good part. Yet Hyde's physical strength might suggest the opposite. The evil side of him possesses a superior power. Jekyll's initial delight whenever he becomes Hyde supports this view, as does the fact that, no matter how appalling the crimes Hyde commits, Jekyll never feels guilty enough to refrain from making the transformation again as soon as he feels the urge. Quotation, Henry Jekyll stood at times aghast before the acts of Edward Hyde. Jekyll writes, but the situation was apart from ordinary laws and insidiously relaxed the grasp of conscience. It was Hyde, after all, and Hyde alone, that was guilty. Please try and remember that quote. It was Hyde alone that was guilty, because we realise that Jekyll doesn't realise that he is responsible as well. He's the one that brings Hyde into being. So as I say, this seems like self-justification, but it is Jekyll who brings Hyde to life, knowing he's pure evil. Jekyll is therefore responsible for Hyde's actions. His unwillingness to convince himself otherwise suggests that the darker side has the upper hand, even when he is Jekyll and not Hyde. Certain details of the story's horrors remain obscure. Again, the theme of mystery is present. Jekyll refuses to give any description of his youthful sins, so we don't know what he was like when he was younger and what led him to this. Rigid Victorian norms would not have allowed Stevenson to elaborate upon Jekyll and Hyde's crimes if they're too gruesome. So Stevenson's larger point is that the lure of the dark side constitutes a universal part of human nature. We are all Jekylls trying to keep Hyde under control. So Stevenson's saying that we all have that darker side, that impulse, that human nature does consist of good and evil. The duality of human nature is a huge theme, and Jekyll explains how he behaved. Jekyll says his aspirations to be taken seriously and respected, quote, with even a deeper trench than the majority of men, severed in me those provinces of good and ill which divide and compound man's dual nature. So this means because of how he wanted other people to view him, he divided his nature more than most would. A province, if we look at language there, is an area of land under particular jurisdiction, like a county or a country. Jekyll uses the word to continue a geographical metaphor, i.e. the trench. So this metaphor of the deeper trench provides an image of land that is divided and split by this trench is a representation of his character and how he divided his good and his evil. So the good and the ill divide and compound man's nature. It means that when they split, you can split them, but it's what makes us complete. So as I say, Stevenson's telling us that we are all a mixture of good and bad. We get the quote, Hyde alone in the ranks of mankind was pure evil. So if we get a question about the character of Hyde, we might remember that quick quote, pure evil. 2-word quotation, easy to remember, kind of sums up the character he is. Key quotation at the top of the screen there with some bullet points underneath. It was on the moral side and in my own person that I learned to recognise the thorough and primitive duality of man. I saw that of the two natures that contended in the field of my consciousness, even if I could rightly be said to be either, it was only because I was radically both, and from an early date I had learned to dwell with pleasure as a beloved daydream on the thought of the separation of these elements. So the letter allows us finally to glimpse the events of the novel from the inside, and in this passage Jekyll discusses the years that lead up to the discovery of the potion and the transformation into Hyde. He describes his theory regarding humans' dual nature, and he states that human beings are half virtuous and half criminals, half moral and half immoral. Jekyll's goal in his experiment is to separate these two elements, creating a being of pure good and a being of pure evil. Jekyll succeeds only in separating Hyde, his evil half, and he remains a mixture of the two. But eventually, as I said earlier, Hyde dominates until Jekyll doesn't exist anymore. So, this outcome suggests a possible fallacy in Jekyll's assumption. Perhaps he did not possess an equally good half and evil half as he thought. The events of the novel imply that the dark side is far stronger than the rest of Jekyll. So strong that once set free, it takes over him. So please consider this. Whilst he thinks he's a mixture of good and evil, it is his evil side that reigns supreme and takes over. Another key section is here. I don't expect you to remember it all, but let's just have a look. I was still cursed with the duality of purpose. Again, keywords here, cursed. And as the first edge of my penitence wore off, the lower side of me, so long indulged, so recently chained down, began to growl for licence. Not that I dreamed of resuscitating Hyde. No, it was in my own person that I was once more tempted to trifle with my conscience. However, this brief condescension to my evil finally destroyed the balance of my soul. And yet I was not alarmed. The fall seemed natural, like a return to the old days before I had made discovery. It was a fine day. I sat in the sun on a bench, the animal within me licking the chops of memory. Look at that. We've had links to primates and primeval all the way through. The spiritual side a little drowsed, promising subsequent penitence, but not yet moved to begin. After all, I reflected I was like my neighbours, and then I smiled, comparing myself with other men, comparing my active goodwill with the lazy cruelty of their neglect. And at the very moment of that vainglorious thought, a qualm came over me, a horrid nausea, and the most deadly shuddering. I began to be aware of a change in the temper of my thoughts, a greater boldness, a contempt of danger, a solution of the bonds of obligation. I looked down. My clothes hung formlessly on my shrunken limbs. The hand that lay on my knee was corded and hairy. I was once more Edward Hyde. I'm going to analyse this huge quote on the next slide, but there's a lot of key information here. Jekyll begins to transform into his darker self spontaneously. In this particular instance, it only takes a single prideful thought to effect the transformation. The novel gives no details here of the exact sins involved. We just get brief condescension to evil. And thus when he mentions the animal within me licking the chops of memory, we are left to imagine what dark deeds he remembers. And there's a contrast between the animal within him and the spiritual side. I've said this before, I'll say it again. So far we've had Hyde as an ape-like fury, like a monkey, the creature, like a man restored from death, and now we've got the animal licking its chops. Hyde's body is presented as animal-like as well. We see that it's corded and hairy. As Hyde, he loses the conscious abilities to form language, falling victim to instinct, losing the ability to recall what's happened. Stevenson, this is huge. Stevenson implies that Jekyll, in becoming Hyde, is regressing into the primitive world of animals. Please pause the video and make a note of this slide. I've got now an example paragraph showing you how to write about Jekyll's struggle, and then that'll be the end of the video. In a question that could include Jekyll's struggle, we might write this. When explaining or attempting to explain his transformation into Hyde, Jekyll uses imagery. He speaks of Hyde as an animal or brute who is caged or chained inside Jekyll, and when released comes out roaring when the potion is consumed. This image of an animal who is dangerous but controlled when in a cage, however deadly if it escapes, is a fitting allusion for the dual character of Jekyll. To elaborate, after one of Hyde's outings, he describes two responses within himself. We are presented with the evil side of him who reacts like the animal within me licking the chops of memory, satisfied at its behaviour, whereas the other more moral side is a little drowsed. And unfortunately, this implies that his goodness is being neglected and overpowered by something more sinister, and he confesses to comparing myself with other men, comparing my active goodwill. So if you look, I've just used short quotations where possible. To elaborate there, it shows the examiner you're going to add on in terms of your explanation. I've mentioned dual character. I've said nothing there that is too difficult for yourself. So you've got, the hardest thing I think is remembering quotations. So make sure you go back through for your revision. I hope this video has been useful. Please watch all 3 videos. So that's an analysis of context and chapters 1 to 3, an analysis of chapters 4 to 7, and then you've got this analysis as well. Please consult my YouTube channel for anything else you may need. Just type Stacey Reay into YouTube. Stacey, and Reay is Reay, and good luck in your literature exam.